I need to show you a number that should fundamentally change the way you think about your money, your savings, and your financial future. $2 trillion. That is how much China processed through its digital currency system in a single month this past September. Not through Visa, not through the Western banking system, not through anything that requires America's permission to exist. Through an entirely independent infrastructure that connects 180 million digital wallets to 23 central banks, settles transactions in 7 seconds, and operates at 98% lower cost than traditional banking. While most people were not paying attention, China quietly turned on the machine that is designed to end dollar dominance. And here is what almost nobody is telling you about this. It is not new, it is not unexpected, and it is not a political opinion. What is happening to the dollar right now follows a pattern that has destroyed every single reserve currency in recorded history, and I can prove it to you with 500 years of evidence that will make the present moment impossible to ignore. Right now, the United States dollar controls 56.3% of global reserves. That might sound strong until you realize it was over 70% just 25 years ago. That is a decline of nearly 1 percentage point per year, and the pace is accelerating. At the current trajectory, dollar dominance ends before 2035. Meanwhile, China's digital yuan doubled its transaction volume in just 14 months. Malaysia is settling oil in yuan. Thailand is settling oil in yuan. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil. The petrodollar monopoly that has underpinned American financial power for half a century is already fracturing. And before you say that America is different, that this time things will work out because of our technology, our military, or our innovation, let me stop you right there. Every dying empire in history said exactly the same thing. The Spanish said it, the Dutch said it, the British said it. They all followed the exact same pattern, and every single one of them was wrong. Let me give you the raw numbers, because I think you need to see them clearly before we go any further. America's national debt as of December 2025 is $38.4 trillion. It grew by $2.23 trillion in just the last year alone. That works out to $6.12 billion per day, $255 million per hour, and roughly $70,000 for every second you have been watching this video. Per person, every American citizen currently owes $112,881. Per household, the figure is $284,914. But here's the number that really matters, the one that turns a problem into a trap. Interest payments on that debt consumed $879.9 billion last year. That money is not going to roads, schools, defense, or anything that benefits the public. It is pure interest paid to bondholders, and it is now the third largest line item in the entire federal budget. 13% of every dollar the government spends goes to servicing debt. And the trap gets worse. Half of all U.S. government debt matures by 2026, which means it has to be refinanced at whatever interest rates exist at that time. The average rate right now is 3.382%. That sounds low until you calculate what it means on $38 trillion. And if rates rise even one additional percentage point, that adds another $380 billion in annual interest, every year, permanently. This is not a budget problem. This is a system approaching terminal velocity. Now let me show you the pattern, because once you see it, the present becomes impossible to deny. Every reserve currency in history has followed a 5-stage sequence, no exceptions. And the mechanism is driven by two forces that never change: mathematics and human nature. The first stage is foundation. A nation rises through real economic power, not paper promises, but genuine production, trade surpluses, accumulated wealth, and military strength sufficient to protect commerce. Other nations want the currency because it represents actual, tangible value. This is the earning phase, and it is always legitimate. The second stage is ascendancy. Through war, trade, or international agreement, that currency becomes the global reserve. Other countries hold it, commodities are priced in it, and debts are settled in it. This creates what economists call exorbitant privilege. The reserve nation can print money and export the inflation to everyone else. It can borrow at rates that would destroy any other economy. It can run deficits that seem impossible. And for a time, it works beautifully. Trade expands, the world grows, and everyone benefits. But the privilege becomes a temptation, and the printing press becomes the answer to every problem. The third stage is overextension. Once you can print the world's money, stopping becomes politically impossible. Military spending explodes, social programs balloon, and the government borrows not for emergencies, but as permanent policy. And there is a mechanism built into reserve currency status that makes this inevitable. The reserve nation must run persistent trade deficits because the rest of the world needs its currency for trade. The only way to supply those dollars to the global economy is to import more than you export, year after year, decade after decade. To finance those deficits, you borrow. To service the borrowing, you print. The money supply grows faster than real economic output, and purchasing power erodes. Slowly at first, 1 or 2% per year, but the trajectory is locked in. The fourth stage is crisis. Eventually, the math catches up. Foreign holders of the currency realize they are holding a melting ice cube and begin to diversify. A central bank adds gold here, a country settles trade in its own currency there. The reserve share starts declining, and this creates a feedback loop. As confidence drops, more holders exit. As more holders exit, confidence drops faster. The reserve nation cannot stop printing because its entire system is built on monetary expansion. Inflation accelerates. The government intervenes with controls, with desperate policy measures, with increasingly aggressive monetary tools. None of it works because the problem is mathematical. Too many currency units chasing too little real value. The fifth stage is transformation. The old currency loses reserve status, not through a single dramatic event, but through thousands of individual decisions by banks, companies, and governments, choosing the path of least resistance, which increasingly runs through systems that are independent of the old reserve currency. A new currency emerges, backed by the nation with the strongest trade surplus and the willingness to maintain sound money. And here's the final piece of the pattern. The new reserve currency will eventually follow the exact same cycle, because the temptation of printing the world's money is universal. The cycle repeats. It always has. Now let me prove this to you with 4 historical examples that span 2,000 years, different continents, different cultures, and different technologies, but identical outcomes. Start with Rome, because it is the template for everything that followed. The silver denarius was introduced around 211 BC at 4.5 grams of 95 to 98% pure silver. It became the universal currency of the Mediterranean world, backed by the most powerful military and trade network in the ancient world. For centuries, the system worked. Then Emperor Nero, needing money after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, reduced the weight and silver content of the denarius. Every emperor after him continued the debasement. Under Trajan, under Marcus Aurelius, under Commodus, the pattern was always the same. More spending required more coins, which required less silver in each coin. By the early 3rd century, the denarius contained less than 50% silver. By 268 AD, under Gallienus, it was just 2.4%. Inflation exploded. By the time Diocletian issued his famous price edict in 301 AD, a measure of wine that once cost an eighth of a denarius now cost 8 debased denarii. Trade collapsed, barter returned, and the empire fragmented. The replacement came under Constantine in 312 AD with the gold solidus, which stabilized Byzantine commerce for centuries. But the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476, largely from the economic chaos that currency destruction had created. Now jump forward to the 1690s in England. King Charles II had borrowed heavily from goldsmiths in 1672 and then simply refused to repay, destroying trust in sovereign lending. By the time England was fighting the 9 Years' War against France, nobody would lend to the crown. The solution was the Bank of England, founded in 1694 on the revolutionary principle of public subscription, with clear rules and limited liability. For over 2 centuries, the bank maintained stability, and the British pound became the world's reserve currency after Britain adopted the gold standard. But then came the World Wars. The cost of 2 global conflicts in 30 years bled the empire dry. By 1944, Britain was effectively bankrupt, and the Bretton Woods Conference transferred reserve currency status to the United States. The pound did not collapse overnight. It faded over 50 years, from the 1920s through the 1970s, as Britain's economic reality could no longer support its currency's global role. Then came Weimar Germany, where the pattern played out at terrifying speed. Germany had financed World War I through debt rather than taxes, reaching 156 billion marks by 1918. The Treaty of Versailles added 50 billion marks in reparations. When Germany fell behind on payments, France and Belgium occupied the Ruhr Valley in January 1923. The government ordered 2 million workers to strike, but continued paying them, and the only way to fund that was to print money massively. The exchange rate went from 320 marks per dollar in early 1922 to 4.2 trillion marks per dollar by November 1923. A loaf of bread that cost 160 marks at the end of 1922 cost 200 billion marks 11 months later. Workers were paid twice daily with breaks to spend their wages before prices rose again. Pensioners starved. The middle class was annihilated. The replacement currency, the Rentenmark, arrived on November 15, 1923, at a rate of 1 trillion old marks to 1 new mark. The hyperinflation ended, but the social damage was permanent, and the trauma created fertile ground for the extremism that followed. And finally, August 15, 1971. President Nixon went on national television and announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold. The Bretton Woods system that had made the dollar the world's reserve currency since 1944 died that night. The background was pure Stage 3. Vietnam, the Cold War, and Great Society programs had driven spending far beyond what gold reserves could support. Foreign governments, especially France under de Gaulle, had been converting their dollars to gold, and Fort Knox was bleeding. By August 1971, the choice was simple: stop printing or abandon gold convertibility. The political incentive was overwhelming. Gold was $35 per ounce in 1971. Today it is above $3,000. That represents a 98% loss in the dollar's purchasing power against gold in 54 years. 4 examples spanning 2,000 years. Different languages, different technologies, different political systems. Identical pattern. Now let me map it to America so you can see exactly where we are. Stage 1 is complete. America emerged from World War II as the only major power with intact infrastructure, massive trade surpluses, most of the world's gold, and absolute military dominance. The foundation was real economic strength. Stage 2 is complete. Bretton Woods in 1944 made the dollar the global reserve. Oil was priced in dollars, debts were settled in dollars, and America enjoyed exorbitant privilege for 3 decades. Stage 3 has been underway for 50 years. Since Nixon closed the gold window, every constraint on printing has been removed. National debt went from $1 trillion in 1981 to $5 trillion in 1996, to $10 trillion in 2008, to $20 trillion in 2017, to $38.4 trillion today. Debt to GDP hit 119% in the second quarter of 2025, up from 33% in 1980. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet exploded from $900 billion in 2007 to nearly $9 trillion at its peak in 2022. M2 money supplies surged from $15 trillion in March 2020 to over $21 trillion by early 2022, a 40% expansion in 2 years. Stage 4 is where we are right now, and the evidence is overwhelming. The dollar's share of global reserves has dropped from 72% in 2001 to 56.3% today. Central banks are diversifying aggressively into gold, with China increasing its holdings from 1,042 tons in 2005 to 2,330 tons by September 2025. Russia, India, Poland, Uzbekistan, and Turkey have all been accumulating gold at rates not seen in decades. Countries are actively building alternatives to the dollar system. China's CIPS payment network now connects 23 central banks. Saudi Arabia signed a 50 billion yuan currency swap with China and is accepting yuan for oil. India and Russia are settling trade in rupees and rubles. BRICS nations have created a new development bank as an alternative to the World Bank and IMF. And the feedback loop is accelerating. As dollar reserves decline, the U.S. must offer higher interest rates to attract Treasury buyers, which increases debt service costs, which forces more borrowing, which requires more printing, which accelerates inflation, which drives more foreign diversification. The cycle feeds itself. And Stage 5 is not a future prediction. It is already beginning. China's digital yuan infrastructure is operational, connecting to 10 ASEAN nations, 6 Middle Eastern countries, and processing real-time settlements in 7 seconds. The mBridge multilateral CBDC platform, linking China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE, achieved minimum viable product status in 2024 with instant cross-border settlement that does not touch the dollar. When the United States weaponized the dollar against Russia in February 2022 by freezing $300 billion in sovereign reserves, it sent a clear message to every government on Earth. Holding dollars means vulnerability to unilateral American action. Even allies are quietly diversifying. Europeans discuss strategic autonomy. Gulf states negotiate with China. Neutral countries hedge. Each bilateral agreement in local currency, each central bank adding gold, each country joining an alternative payment system removes another brick from the foundation of dollar dominance. So what does this mean for you personally? Let me be direct with you because I think this deserves honesty rather than comfort. The first thing you need to understand is that if you are holding dollars in a savings account, you are holding a melting ice cube. Official inflation understates reality. The cost of shelter, food, energy, education, and healthcare have been rising faster than the Consumer Price Index suggests for years. A traditional savings account earning 0.5% interest, while real inflation runs above 3%, means you are losing purchasing power every single year, quietly and reliably. The second thing is that the transition from one reserve currency to another does not happen smoothly. When the pound lost its reserve status, the process took 50 years and involved 2 world wars. This time involves nuclear powers and deeply integrated global supply chains. The path forward will include currency volatility, trade disruptions, political instability, and potentially the kind of geopolitical conflict that accompanies every major shift in global financial power. Planning for disruption is not paranoia, it is pattern recognition. The third thing is that the assets which have historically preserved wealth through these transitions are not paper assets. They are tangible things with inherent value that cannot be printed or debased. Real estate that generates income, productive businesses with real cash flow, commodities like gold and silver, and equity in companies with genuine pricing power. These do not guarantee profits, but they provide protection against the specific kind of wealth erosion that occurs when a reserve currency enters its decline phase. Every person in Weimar Germany had a choice in 1922: hold marks or convert to real assets. Most held marks and lost everything. Every person in Britain during the 1920s had the same choice. Most trusted the pound, and their savings eroded over 50 years. The fourth thing, and I think this is the most practical, is that you should reduce dollar-denominated debt, especially variable rate debt. In a currency crisis, interest rates spike unpredictably. Fixed rate debt is manageable. Variable rate debt can destroy you overnight. Reducing leverage before a crisis forces you to is one of the most important financial decisions you can make right now. And the fifth thing is simply to pay attention to the milestones, because the transition will not be announced at a press conference or declared at an international summit. It will happen through thousands of quiet individual decisions. Watch the reserve data quarterly. Watch central bank gold purchases. Watch bilateral trade agreements that bypass the dollar. When the dollar's reserve share drops below 50%, the acceleration will intensify dramatically. When oil trades primarily in Yuan, the petrodollar era is finished. When your local bank offers digital Yuan accounts, the transformation is complete. These milestones are coming. The only question is how quickly. I also want to address the objections that inevitably come up whenever someone discusses the decline of the dollar, because you have probably already thought of at least one of them. The first objection is American exceptionalism, the idea that America's military, its technology, and its innovation make the dollar irreplaceable. This is exactly what every declining reserve power has believed. Britain had the Royal Navy, the largest empire in history, and London as the global financial capital. It did not matter. The math overtook the might. The second objection is that the economy is strong, and technology will solve the problem. The economy is large, but size does not equal soundness. When debt grows at 4 to 6% annually, and the economy grows at 2 to 3%, the gap compounds relentlessly. Technology does not override bad monetary math. Rome had aqueducts, Britain had the Industrial Revolution, and neither could print their way to sustainability. The third objection is that the government will intervene and fix it. The government is intervening, and that is precisely the problem. Every intervention since 1971 has involved more printing, lower rates, and larger balance sheets. Each crisis brings a more aggressive response, and each response makes the next crisis larger. Government intervention does not solve unsustainable debt. It delays the reckoning and makes the eventual resolution more painful. And the fourth objection, the most seductive one, is that this time is different because of digital currency. Technology changes the mechanism of debasement, but not the outcome. Weimar Germany had the most sophisticated printing presses of its era. It did not matter. Digital currency makes transactions faster and surveillance easier, but it does not create real wealth, reverse debt accumulation, or change the fundamental mathematics of compound interest on $38 trillion. You cannot stop this pattern. No individual can. No government has ever been able to, despite having far more information about the pattern than previous generations. The mechanism runs on incentives that are built into the structure of reserve currency status itself. The ability to print the world's money is both the greatest privilege and the greatest curse a nation can possess, because the political pressure to keep printing is always overwhelming, and the long-term consequence is always the same. But you can see the pattern clearly, and seeing it gives you something that most people do not have: time. Time to position your savings outside a system that is mathematically deteriorating. Time to acquire assets that maintain value across currency transitions. Time to reduce your exposure to the specific risks that intensify as Stage 4 deepens and Stage 5 accelerates. History does not repeat precisely, but the mechanism has not changed in 500 years because the forces driving it, compound interest on unsustainable debt, and the political impossibility of fiscal discipline, are constants of human civilization. The dollar's decline is not a conspiracy theory, a political opinion, or a prediction. It is a mathematical process that is already well underway, documented in the reserve data, visible in the gold purchases, and measurable in the infrastructure being built to replace it. The only question that matters for you personally is whether you will recognize what is happening in time to act, or whether you will be the next generation that learns this lesson the hard way.